I think about what do I think about the exegetical versus topical? So this is interesting because I just became Catholic, and they are much more topical than exegetical. I personally think that exegetical preaching is on its way out for a couple reasons. People are moving way too much. Well, there's two ways you can think about this. People are moving a lot, and so when I was growing up, there were a lot of pastors who would be like, we're going to take an entire 3 years to get through Romans. And, you'd go to different churches and the pastors would be bragging about how long it's taken them to get through one book of the Bible. The problem with that is that, number one, practically speaking, in the Protestant world, it's not required that you show up on Sundays as it is in the Catholic world. If you miss Mass on Holy Day of Obligation, which is Sundays, then you're in a grave sin. So the idea of showing up for exegetical services in the Protestant world, the people who want to hear them are going to show up. The people who don't are just going to come and go, and it kind of defeats the purpose. I personally think that exegetical preaching would just be better if they did it in a small group, because I think that would keep them from giving. The goal is to get people a continuity of the book of the Bible. But you can't really do that because people have schedules in life and they can't keep up. But now with technology, what pastors I think should do is do exegetical podcasts, because they could do topical sermons and exegetical podcasts, and then they have this archive of content. I think that if you look at where things are going, I think that churches need to cut back on the live streams, and they need to start using podcasts as kind of like the hook to get people in. So exegetical preaching would be a great way to do that. As far as topical goes, I think that is important. Now, God's going to use the word, whether it's preached exegetically or topical, but I do think that I think that it goes in phases. In times of freedom and prosperity, like exegetical preaching is great, but when you're looking at a time where Christians are going to be persecuted and struggling, then politically or even societally, I think that you've got to, the pastor is supposed to know what his flock is going through and needs to preach accordingly. And that's going to necessarily probably require topical rather than exegetical. The Catholic Church, they have the daily mass, and they have readings, and they have homilies that are based on those passages. And I just think that is the better approach, because it's a more unified approach. When you can go into a Catholic church and you can hear the same readings, the same passages, I think that's a really beautiful thing. Now, granted, you could go into an Anglican church, hear those things, but at the end of the day, they don't have to. Whereas in the Catholic Church, it's expected that they're at least in line with those readings. So it sounds a little bit indifferent, and I just wrote a quote on it. But basically my answer is that if I had to choose, I would choose topical, because people should be doing their own Bible study and involved in the church anyway. And so if people are coming to Sunday and that's when they're getting their primary biblical education, I think that is not ideal. Secondly, I also think that church is primarily for worship and not essentially for a lecture. And exegetical preaching tends to be 30 to 45 minutes long, and that means that the pastor is more the centerpiece than Christ in the Mass. And so, but again, I'm Catholic, so new Catholic to be sure, but I like being Catholic a lot. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you for sending it. And if you guys have questions, make sure you send them in. Drop them in the comments. I'll definitely answer them in my next podcast.